Good morning and welcome to a special live broadcast to commemorate VE Day, the day 75 years ago that marked the unconditional surrender of the German forces and victory in Europe. Today's commemorations are obviously different to those we'd planned only a few short months ago. Life has changed dramatically for all of us in that time, and particularly for the Second World War veterans, for whom today means so much. It's a chance for them to reflect, to remember, and rejoice in everything that was achieved 75 years ago. Today they find themselves in lockdown, sometimes alone and isolated, but overall in high spirits. Ladies and gentlemen of the Second World War generation, you are an absolute inspiration to us. You only have to look at Colonel Tom Moore to see that. And we want to say thank you and share this important day with you. And not just our beloved veterans of 75 years ago, but all those on the front line today who are bravely continuing to work in their key jobs to help keep us safe. The NHS, the care workers, the emergency services, all those in our food stores keeping the shelves stocked and making deliveries, everyone working around the clock to keep us safe and healthy. Your service and sacrifice does not go unnoticed, and we thank and salute you all. So please put your feet up, relax and enjoy what we have in store for you. There are performances from Alfie Boe, cookery tips from TV chef Melissa Hemsely, and a message from Hollywood royalty, Dame Joan Collins no less. But most importantly, we'll be hearing from our veterans and frontline workers and you, our viewers. I'll tell you how to get in touch very soon. But first, no VE Day tribute would be complete without hearing from the forces' sweetheart herself, Dame Vera Lynn. She's written a message to all the veterans of the Second World War, and to read it, here is actress Lesley Sharp.
This is a message from Dame Vera Lynn. As we commemorate the 75th anniversary of the end of the war, what a perfect opportunity for me to say thank you to everyone who did their bit to help us fight for freedom. Not only our wonderful Air Force, Navy and Army, but all the munitions workers in factories, those who broke the codes, the land girls, and everyone else in the country, neighbours helping neighbours, every person involved helping in some way. My love and thanks to you all. Dame Vera.
Thank you, Lesley Sharp and Dame Vera Lynn, for those lovely words. Now, our first live guest today is one of Britain's greatest Paralympic athletes. She's won a total of 16 Paralympic medals, 11 of them gold. She's broken 30 world records on the track and won the London Marathon 6 times. And we share a birthday. Please welcome the extraordinary Baroness Grey-Thompson. Hello there, Tanny. How are you?
Hello. Good, thank you.
We saw that you were lucky enough to find out a little bit more about your grandfather, William, and what he did for the home front during the war. What did his work involve?
Well, my grandfather was in the First World War and he got injured but in the Second World War, he was an air raid warden. And what was just fascinating, he never talked about it like so many people in his generation, but what we found out is just how little equipment they had to deal with bombs. You know, they basically had a bicycle pump to pump water and a tin hat and a set of overalls. And that was it. And they had every hour doing amazing things. It's quite hard when your grandfather's called William Jones to track down information. But it just brought me to me how many people on the front just did an incredible job in just unbelievably difficult circumstances.
And as you said, he was in the Welsh Guards during the First World War and served in the Battle of Somme. So he's experienced both World Wars, but in those very different roles.
Well, all he ever said about the First World War was that, you know, he fought in the battles and all he ever said was some sanctuary. And it was many, many years after he died that we were able to find out anything at all about that. And the only thing he really talked to me about, he had this First World War whistle that had 1914 written on it. And then he used to use that to call attention to the bombing range. And I was very lucky to take part in this program called Home Front Heroes. And and talk to people and who'd been the victims of the bombings. And the thing that just makes me cry now is when people in Cardiff, which growing up, talked about hearing the bombers coming overhead and missing Cardiff, but then knowing that they were going to live on. And that sense of relief, that one night they were safe, but other people in the country weren't. And the guilt and all the different emotions that brought home to them, that, we need to remember things like that because we're so lucky. Even in this type of pandemic, we need to remember what happened all those years ago.
I know the sound is difficult, Tanny, but I think it's so well worth hearing a little bit more about William. You said you had his whistle, which was inscribed with 1914, as a bit of a keepsake from him. How lovely. And I know it was so emotional for you to find out so much about him. Why was it so important to you and your family to learn more about his roles in both World Wars?
I think because he never talked about it. And then over the years, through history lessons, through school, we became more aware of what happened in the war. And then we started trying to track him down. And I think there was something like 65 William Joneses in his age group that we've got sort of down as far as. And I think we just wanted to understand a bit more about what people have gone through. You can't imagine the horror. But it's part of our family history, it's part of our lives now. And for me, actually, the Second World War, finding out about that was really important because I think we just had no idea whatsoever. You can look at dates of battles, you can look at other things, but that night after night, that fear, that helping your local community, when you see a house bombed in your local community, you know the family that lives there, you know the names of the children, they're so close to you. And then people were going in, rescuing, putting their lives on the line all the time, as much as men and women who were working overseas were. So it was important to try and find out. I'm a huge fan of understanding our history. We hopefully don't make the same mistakes again. Sadly, we often do, but I think it's important to know where we've come from to understand the decisions that we make in the here and now.
Tanny, thank you. Yes, important to know where we came from to find out where we should be going. I know you'll be thinking about your grandfather William today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Tanny. Well, those who stayed behind protecting the home front, like Tanny's grandfather, found themselves in extraordinary circumstances. And for many women, their lives changed forever as they took over the jobs traditionally performed by men. 101-year-old Mary Lawson was in her early 20s during the Second World War, working as one of the first female recording engineers at Maida Vale Studios. Here she tells us of her experience of living and working in the bombed capital during that time.
In 1940, I was directed to the engineering department of the BBC, and I joined a group of other women, and we were excellently trained by the resident engineers to become recording engineers at Maida Vale Studios. We recorded everything. The King on Christmas Day, Churchill's speeches, government announcements, and news from all the battlefronts, and of course, loads of entertainment. Itmar, Vera Lynn, Music While You Work, and of course classical music and drama. At last, after 6 long years, VE Day arrived. My friend and I joined the crowds in London and got carried around in the crush, not knowing where we were going. We couldn't get anywhere near Buckingham Palace. There didn't seem to be many uniformed men in those crowds. I suppose they were still scattered along Europe, over Europe, in France, Germany, and Italy, and of course still fighting in Burma. Not to mention those who were in prisoner of war camps. As we walked home, we passed acres of derelict bomb sites and ruined buildings and patched up homes. And we wondered, well, what happens now?
Thank you so much, Mary Lawson. Well, one service that should never be overlooked when recounting the bravery of the Second World War is the Merchant Navy. Frequently referred to as the forgotten seamen, these brave men and women quite literally put their lives on the line to keep the home fires burning by transporting vital supplies of food, arms, ammunition and fuel, the necessities for Britain to defend itself. It's thought 1 in 3 Merchant Navy lost their lives. Well, I'm joined now by Donald Hunter, who joined the Merchant Navy at only 16 years old. Nice to see you smiling, Donald. How are you?
Good morning, very well.
That's lovely to hear.
A little bit nervous here.
No need to be nervous. We're just having a lovely chat. You were so young, only 16. Tell us about the role that you had on those ships.
I joined the Merchant Navy at 16, but I went to I was trained for a radio officer, so I went to radio college until I qualified later. During the Battle of the Atlantic, I served on 3 ships, which were Royal Fleet auxiliary ships in support of the armed forces. That's 2 high-octane aviation fuel tankers and a high-explosive ship. So all dangerous ships. And my life on the Battle of the Atlantic, which was a very viciously fought engagement, my cabin on the tankers was on the main fuel tank deck. So, of course, it's a little bit nervous going to bed at night. Not that I had much chance, because I was up most of the night, so there you are.
Well, you mentioned the Battle of the Atlantic there. You found yourself in the midst of the biggest battles, some of them in the Second World War. You were in the Normandy landings. What was that like for such a young man? Well,
it was very terrifying. That was my first ship, which was an infantry landing ship, which I was just 18 at the time. And I also radio West when I first qualified as a radio officer. And of course, our job was transporting the infantry troops. And our ship was particularly engaged with the 51st Highland Division, landing on the Juno beaches. And as a young man and my first experience of actual warfare, I don't want to go through it again. It was absolutely terrific. The landings, and what was so sad, the amount of men of all, of the Allies who were lost in that. We had the job of bringing in the troops right close onto the beachhead. So, of course, we were directly under fire from the Germans, who were determined to sink us. And we were determined to beat them. There you are.
Donald, what was life like when you got home after the war?
After the war, well, on VE Day, I was in India, and we were waiting then. I was on a tanker, at that time serving on the Merchant Navy 3-4 Fleet Auxiliary tanker, and we were waiting orders to go to the Pacific and join the combined Allied fleet on the attack on Japan. But when they dropped the atom bombs, both of them, when they'd done the final one, the Japanese surrendered, we were very, very pleased for ourselves, very sad for the great loss of life over it. It should never have happened. But I didn't return until just after VJ Day. Just after VJ Day, I landed in Falmouth and came up to meet the family. And I remember going up to, I was living, of course, a young man, I was living at home. And I rang on the doorbell. My mother came to the door and first of all told me off for not communicating with them. And I said, well, I did. I was sending letters all the time, but I had nothing from you, because the communication was appalling then, because all the transports, all the ships, their movements were very highly secret documented. So usually, being on a tanker, as soon as I arrived at a port late and the mail got to me, I'd already left, because we were only in port for something like 24, 30 hours, and then we're away again. So that was my first experience.
I love that your welcome home was a telling off from your mother. Thank you so much. It's so lovely to see your smiling face this morning, Donald. Take care of yourself.
Yeah, my family had no idea where I was. All the time I was abroad. No idea.
Must have been such a worry. Thank you so much and enjoy the day.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Donald. Now, on the 1st of September 1939, 2 days before Britain declared war on Germany, 1.5 million people were transported within 3 days from towns and cities to places of safety in the countryside. Most of them were school children, tagged with luggage labels, separated from their parents, and without knowing when or if they'd be coming back. Dame Joan Collins remembers how it felt to be an evacuee in war-torn Britain.
Well, I was very young when the war broke out, so it's very hard to remember how it actually started for me. But what I do know is that I was evacuated constantly because my mother really wanted to be with my father, and he had to stay in London because he was putting shows on to entertain the people who were staying behind in London. My schooling was a disaster because every time we went to a new place, I had to go to a new school. And that was very tough. But the thing about being away and being evacuated was that we were lucky because we were always with our mother, and that made a big difference. And then at the end of the war, we were back in London for the last year, I think, and there were a lot of bombs happening, and we got bombed out. And I remember going to our home in Maida Vale and seeing that the whole flat was gone. "Oh, where's my toys?" I said to my mother. "Well, we'll have to buy you some more," said my father toughly. And in actual fact, I did start making toys. I made toys for my doll's house. I made doll's furniture with conkers and pins and twine or cotton putting around them. And then we used to have to go and sleep in the underground. The one at Marble Arch was the one that we went to the most, but it was very convivial. People had accordions and they would sing, and there was a little bit of dancing as long as they didn't fall into the train tracks. And Jackie and I would try and go to sleep, but it was a lovely atmosphere of we'll get this done, we won't be beaten. And I kept on hearing about Churchill. We never saw him because, of course, we didn't have TV, but we did listen to him. And then on the actual day of VE Day, Daddy put us all into his car and we drove around London, and I had never seen anything like it. It was full of people dancing and singing and kissing each other and hugging each other, climbing up lampposts and waving the Union Jack and screaming with joy. So I want to thank, on this VE Day, all the fabulous soldiers and sailors and Marines and WAFs and Wrens and RAF pilots and everybody who helped us win that war. And much love to you who are still with us. Thank you.
Well put, Dame Joan Collins. Now, we often hear that living with COVID-19 is comparable to living in Britain in the Second World War. There's talk about workers on the front line, families being separated from their loved ones, and people crowding around the television in the same way that they crowded around wireless sets in the 40s, desperate for the latest news. Well, joining me now is historian and author Julie Summers to shed some light on those parallels. Morning, Julie. How are you?
Good morning, Sonali. Very well, thank you. Very well indeed.
That question means so much more nowadays, doesn't it? And we're using the same language, talking about that front line. Is it fair to draw those comparisons?
Yes, I think it is. I mean, there are similarities and differences, but one thing that I'm very conscious of is that we are in basically a total war situation, which is what people were in during the Second World War. That was a situation where there were no non-combatants. So everybody, every man, woman, and child was a fair target for the Luftwaffe. And we're in that situation again. Nobody is unaffected by coronavirus, whether you're on the front line as a doctor or working in the supermarkets or in the getting in material to people, or whether you're living with the knowledge that one of your family members is suffering from this horrible disease. And so the sense of dislocation, I think, is there in the same way as it was in the war. But of course, the difference is that we are all isolated now, whereas during the war, as we saw in that marvellous footage from Joan Collins, people were thrown together. They were physically very close. So there is a big difference as well as the similarities.
Physically very close in certain circumstances, but earlier we were listening to Donald Hunter, who said his mum told him off when he came home because for not communicating, they couldn't get their letters to each other. Today we can't touch each other or be close, but we can stay connected. We're so lucky that we have technology. That just wasn't the case in the Second World War.
No, I mean, that is a fundamental difference. We're so lucky to be able to contact each other via the internet, via social media. But in the war, I mean, there was a good postal service. It went down from 4 deliveries a day to 2. And I remember researching the story of the Army Postal Service, and Major James Drew, who was in charge of post for D-Day, he guaranteed that he would get letters within 1 day, newspapers within 2 days, and parcels within 4 days to men on the front line in Normandy. So there was a real effort to communicate. And of course, there were telegrams and there was the telephone. But I think for us, it's a great deal easier because there are so many different methods of communicating today.
What do you think we can learn from the Second World War generation for what's going on today?
I think the sense of community is extraordinarily powerful and important, and that is something that people had during the war, and that's what we've got now. And I absolutely celebrate that. I think it's one of the very positive aspects of this awful lockdown that we're all having to endure. I think the other thing is forbearance. My wonderful friend at the Royal British Legion, Dr. Robert Lee, said when we had our first Zoom call, the thing we have to learn is to be patient and have forbearance. And that is something that people had to do in the war when they were queuing for food or trying to work out how to sort out their clothes rationing coupons. So there are similarities in that respect. So forbearance, patience, kindness towards other people, and I think an ongoing spirit of generosity.
Not expecting everything to be exactly the same as before, in a way. When on VE Day itself, 75 years ago, we saw a lot of those celebrations, especially on the streets of London. But so many things changed after that. People changed. And some people felt a bit lost. And I'm wondering if the same might happen when this current crisis is coming to an end. That, yes, people will feel like coming together and celebrating, but there'll also be a lot of nerves and people will feel slightly lost.
I think there's absolutely no doubt about it. There will be a sense of dislocation for sure. And that was one of the big issues after the war, because people were coming back from battlefields, from battle zones, from prison war camps in Germany, and then later in August from Japan and the Far East. And they'd all had singular experiences, but so had their families. So the families who lived in London would have experienced the bombing. The families in the countryside may have not experienced the bombing, but they would have experienced shortages. So there was a real sense of dislocation when the two worlds met. And it was difficult for some people. But I think it was also very dependent on how old you were. So for a child of 4, like my mother, who grew up with the war as the backdrop to her life, in some ways, she knew nothing other than war until it ended. For young people who are beautiful and energetic and enthusiastic, life will go on. It'll be a challenge, an exciting challenge. And then for older people, the Second World War was the second major war in 2 generations, or in 1 generation for many of them. Many had lost fathers and brothers in the First World War and were then to go on and lose husbands and sons in the Second World War. And I think with us, there's going to be a real sense of change when the world reopens for business, if you like. And I don't know what is going to change, but I think people's anxiety will will be at the forefront. I fear there will be quite a few mental health problems for people who've been in lockdown, but I think there'll also be a real sense of purpose and hope and determination to get the country back on its feet again.
Julie, thank you so much for joining us to remember and reflect today. Thank you. Enjoy the day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, the national standards of the Royal British Legion play an important role in any service or event commemorated by the Legion. This year, unable to take part in any formal parade, more than 350 branch members and counterparts from other veteran organisations across the world have lowered their standards in their own homes as part of today's virtual VE Day commemorations. Now, individuals and families all over the country have come together in these difficult times to offer support to those who need it the most. And the most famous family in the land are also doing their bit. Earlier this week, their Royal Highnesses, the Earl and Countess of Wessex, telephoned several veterans who were wanting some company and a chat. One of the people the Countess spoke to was Barbara Herman from Aylesbury, who was in the ATS. The Earl spoke to Jim Healy, a former corporal in the Royal Marines, and 96-year-old Ada Chell from Bangor in Northern Ireland. Here's what the Earl discovered about Ada's wartime experiences.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be able to say hello to you today.
Likewise.
And unfortunately, we have to use this technology as opposed to being able to actually see you face to face. But under the circumstances, it's probably the best we can hope for. You joined the ATS, is that right?
I joined the ATS in 1941. I was a girl guide and I was 17 and a half.
Oh, you obviously remember that moment vividly.
I do. I very much, and when I went to the recruiting office, they kept me there. They thought I had potential.
And so where were you on this day, on VE Day? It was a bittersweet moment because there were still lots of people who were still in Europe, who were still, but it was the knowing that they weren't going to have to fight anymore that was the key to it, wasn't it? Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
But
so
it wasn't much fun coming back after the war. Everything, I think everything had changed so much, or at least
Yes.
probably we had grown up. I think that was the problem. We all grew up very quickly. At 17 and a half, when I look back now, that's reverse plus, and life was completely different.
We're very grateful for all that your family has done, and I hope that there is a bit of you that can celebrate on this anniversary of VE Day.
Well, actually, it's going to be sad because we had planned to go to London to take part in the Victory Parade, and now that's cancelled. And I
know
it was something to look, but this is a terrible tragedy we're going through at the moment, and it really does make people stop and think.
It does, and we will appreciate all the more when it comes to the chance to be able to mark the events properly.
I hope so.
Very
and
good.
I hope that won't be long.
Indeed, we all hope that.
Yes.
Well, Ada, it was lovely to talk to you today. And,
thank you, sir.
And thank you very much indeed for sharing some of your stories and thoughts.
Thank you. Pleasure talking with you.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Earl of Wessex and Ada Chell. Meanwhile, the Countess of Wessex was chatting to Louis Goodwin, who was a pilot with the RAF in the war, flying raids into Germany and France.
Tell me about your time, because you were in the RAF,
yes,
and you were stationed up in Kinloss, I believe.
Yes, Kinloss was where I ended up at the time, and I joined in 1943. I was just 18. I'd been selected about 6 months before for pilot navigator training, but when I joined up, I thought the war's not going to last that long and I'll never get flying, because the training for pilot was a good year. So I elected to go for a quicker course on air gunnery. And,
What were you flying in?
a Lancaster bomber.
Gosh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite an exposed position you were in, because you were right down in the tail of
right at the end by myself. Yes, and
yes.
I wasn't quite as fat as I am now. With flying gear on, it was a job to get in anyway, and a little bit tight, sitting behind 4 machine guns, and so it was a bit restrictive.
How soon after VE Day happened did you go back home, or did you not?
I went back home. My brother, who was 2 years younger than me, so he at the beginning of the war, he was 12 and my sister was 7, and they were immediately evacuated up north. And I didn't see them again until 6 years later, when I came back from Egypt.
Oh,
and
gosh,
I went home then, and they were home, of course, by then.
Yes. Oh, they must have missed you so much.
I think so, especially my sister. She's lovely lady. She's still alive. She's coming up to 88 now. So.
Oh, lovely. And how long did the party last on VE Day? How long did it go in?
I suppose we left about 11 o'clock at night. The truck was
That's quite civilised. Not too bad.
Right, we'd had a few drinks.
You mean you remember the headache the next morning?
Probably, yes, yeah. Yeah, so worrying what we were going to do next.
Absolutely. Yes, yeah, it would have been a very strange feeling the next day that you weren't going to be called to go out on anything. Yeah.
Completely different, not flying. So.
Yes, you have to sort of, the whole mindset has to change, but obviously you managed to do that extremely well, and adapt to a new role.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Louis. So nice to talk to you.
And interestingly, when Louis was training, he was stationed in Regent's Park, and he took his meals at London Zoo. How cool is that? Now, the Countess has been volunteering once a week, working alongside a team of chefs to produce 59,000 free meals for frontline staff in hospitals across London. And there are a staggering number of people who are volunteering to help the fight against COVID-19. When the Royal Voluntary Service put the call out for an army of volunteers, no one could have predicted that the response that was to come. Within just 4 days, 750,000 people had stepped forward to offer their help. One of the initiatives, which the Royal British Legion is involved with, is the check-in and chat call, where volunteers get in touch with people at risk of loneliness as a result of their self-isolation. And one of those who put her hand up to help was Sabrina Ellis, and she joins us live now. Hi there, Sabrina, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Tell us what motivated you to volunteer.
For me, from the beginning of the pandemic, my concern grew for the mental health and well-being of individuals. Now, I have a huge passion for the mental health and well-being of individuals every day, and I wanted to ensure I devoted my time to make a difference for vulnerable people in my local community. And that's what motivated me to reach out to the Royal Voluntary Service through the Good Sam application to give my time as a volunteer for people in self-isolation.
And what does your volunteering involve? How many calls do you make a day, for example?
So with the Good Sam app, what happens is that you receive an alert and you can either accept or reject them. Now, if you reject them, it does go through to another responder, so that's no concern. And if you go on to accept, you go through to the Good Sam app, which gives you the contact details and first and surname of the person who requires your support. Now, when the alert started, I used to receive up to 9 alerts per day. And now, if I'm on duty all day, I can receive up to 26 alerts. And that's 26 people I'm able to support through technology in their own homes.
What do you think it means to people that you're able to spend that time talking to them? How long is your average call?
The calls can vary. Some people can require more time, especially if they've been self-isolating prior to the lockdown. whereas some individuals feel positive and happy with their emotions, that somebody has taken the time through the NHS to give them a call. What I have seen is that it's enabled people to feel strong and to know there's hope, that they are important and that they're not alone through this difficult time.
And what has volunteering done for you? Is it what you thought it would be?
No, it's much more, because the age range of the individuals that I'm able to speak with on a daily basis ranges across the scope of working age to 65 plus people who may have retired. It may involve key workers themselves, carers and students. So we're not just looking at one area of population across the UK, it's for everybody. So it's touching the lives of everybody.
Well, Sabrina, thank you so much for stepping up and joining us today to tell us all about it. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
It's time for some music. During the war, the iconic song We'll Meet Again came to symbolise hope in a time of need. Well, 75 years later, the Queen used the same line when she addressed her nation in lockdown, the same symbol of hope in another time of crisis. Now, individual musicians from the Army, Navy and Air Force and emergency services have come together to form an orchestra to perform this classic wartime favourite. Please welcome the mixed band of Her Majesty's Armed Forces and the Emergency Services, with an arrangement by the Legion's musical director David Cole of We'll Meet Again. We'll Meet Again by the Military and Emergency Services Lockdown Orchestra. Another symbol of hope that's become synonymous with the NHS at this time is the rainbow. We're wearing them, we're putting them in our windows. It's the nation's way of saying thank you. And one of the many thousands of NHS workers we're making rainbows for is Sister Laura Kirby Deacon, who joins us live now. How are you, Laura?
Hiya, good morning.
Good morning. Tell us everything you've been doing, because I understand you like to keep busy.
Yeah, you could say that. So I'm a sister on the intensive care unit in Swindon. And obviously, when we were faced with this challenge, we were presented with the fact that we're going to be looking after a huge amount of people who could potentially be dying alone. And that really saddened me, and it struck a chord with me. So I tried to create a way that we could just make things a tiny bit easier for the loved ones and the patients that were dying. So I put a little plea out on my Facebook page asking people to create pairs of hearts. So the idea being, because sadly we are going to, as a nation, this is going to be the hardest thing that we would have to deal with, and patients will be dying alone. So we created one heart to stay with the patient, and then the other heart would be posted home to the relative.
What reaction have you had?
The response I got, oh, it was mind-blowing. So I think within 4 hours, I was at over 50,000 shares. I was inundated with messages, people wanting to knit, crochet, asking what colour do they have to be. And I think within a week, we had thousands.
And I think it just makes people feel useful as well, doesn't it? If you're not working currently, you're a bit lost, and actually something like this gives you something to do. I think that's why so many people are also, you know, doing the rainbow thing. That, you know, you're wearing the T-shirts and you're putting them in your windows and you're clapping. And I know we're clapping for our carers, but sometimes I think, is that partly for ourselves too? What does it mean for you, someone who actually works in the NHS? Does it make a difference that the rest of us are doing things like that?
Oh, the support that we've had, I think, you know, I've been nursing for 15, 16 years, and the support that we've had behind the NHS has been absolutely phenomenal. I've never, ever been prouder to do the job that I do today.
And you actually started your nursing career as an RAF nurse, so you have a military connection too, don't you?
Yeah, so when I was 18, I joined the Royal Auxiliary Air Force as a medic. I was attached to an Aeromed wing, and I saw things there, you know, that just gave me the insight of actually, this is something that I'd like to do as a full-time job. So I did my full-time service with the Gulf War in 2002. And then when I came out, I restarted my nurse training and qualified as a nurse.
Well, Laura, your hearts have caused a bit of a stir on our Facebook page. People are loving them. They're saying thank you to you. They're sending you hearts. So what a lovely idea. And we salute you, sister, for going that extra mile.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us. Well, as we just heard, Laura started her nursing career in the RAF. My next guest, Mary Bowen-Bravery, that is her actual name, was an RAF nurse in the Second World War. Mary, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
I hope you got to hear a bit of Laura's interview. We heard that it's really tough on the wards. People are there without their family, and that's what she's trying to be there as family. What was it like for young women like you in the war?
Well, I was very lucky, really, because I was training most of the time when the war began. But I was in Leeds General Infirmary being trained. And then in 1944, a bomb dropped on our theatre, which had just been built and equipped very expensively. No one was hurt, but the theatre was completely ruined. And it was then that I got the feeling that I ought to be doing something for the war effort. Originally, I was going to be a health visitor, and I was qualifying for that. But then the next thing that happened made me change my mind. We had a group of prisoners of war from the field hospital, 36 patients one night. We were all called up to help. And they'd all been plastered in a field hospital first, and they had grotesque casts, some with their arms wide up and really in a bad state. And each one of them had to go to the theatre and checked with an X-ray to make sure their limbs had been put in the right place, things like that. And then they were moved off to a different hospital to continue their recovery, I suppose. And then the next thing on my list of things to get qualified for a health visitor, I had to do midwifery. So I went to a Middlesex hospital in North London, North Middlesex, and was horrified the very first night. There were fly bombs and V2s and things like that I'd never really thought about as part of my midwifery training. And eventually one got used to the fact that this was happening every night to Londoners. And in I kept a diary, in my little diary, there's just a line which says, 3 fly bombs and 2 V2s tonight. And just that, nothing else. And anyway, I survived that and decided that I shouldn't be doing a peaceful thing like being a health visitor. I should go and help the war effort. So I decided I'd join the RAF. A relative, a friend I'd grown up with for years, had been killed. He was in a Pathfinder squadron, and I felt that I ought to be helping with my training in the subway. So that is what I did. I joined the Princess Mary's Royal Air Force Nursing Service, and I went to Ely in Cambridgeshire, and we were all in Nissen huts, the sisters, and every night we heard this heavy roaring bombers going over to Germany every night, and it really was absolutely breathtaking, the noise and the feeling that these boys were going over and may not come back. Most of them did there, because it was getting along towards the end of the war then. And from there, I was posted to India, and the war in England, in Europe, was coming to an end. And V-Day, I was in India, so I didn't see any of the celebrations and parties that were going on. I missed all that. But I stayed in India, in Karachi, servicing the RAF there. And we also looked after families for people who were permanently posted to Karachi. And I stayed there, which is a very busy hospital, much the same as in England, very well equipped. All the RAF hospitals seem to be very well equipped. And that's where I stayed until partition started, and there were riots, and it got really difficult, and we couldn't visit Karachi. It was under curfew. And then there came partition and the exchange of Hindus and Muslims going from Delhi to Karachi and back, and there was chaos, really. When it settled down a little bit, we were then faced with the prospect of going to the Far East, because the Japanese war was still going on there. But that finished because the atom bomb dropped and the Japanese surrendered. And then everything then for us in the RAF nursing service, it quietened down, and we were gradually repatriated to England.
Gosh, that one decision to make a career change, and you saw so much, and the people watching you right now on the live stream have been sending you messages thanking you, saying you look wonderful, you sound wonderful, and I'm sure most of them don't even know, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, that in October you will be turning 100, which means you're 99 and a half years old. Let me read you some of the messages. You're amazing. You look amazing. Thank you so much for your service. There's just so many messages for you. Thank you so much for joining us today and telling us your story. I can't believe how much you saw, and you could have just been a regular health visitor. Thank you, Mary. Now, Harry Reid was a 20-year-old wireless operator in the 6th Airborne Division when he jumped into Normandy in the early hours of the 6th of June 1944. The airborne assault paved the way for the greatest amphibious operation in military history. It was D-Day, and Harry joins me on the phone right now. Afternoon, Harry. How are you?
I'm very well indeed, thank you.
So you were just 20 years old and you parachuted into Normandy on D-Day. What are your memories of that day?
My memories are really quite vivid. We were well trained, of course. None of us had been in action except our leaders, and they were brilliant leaders. But we were told in our final briefing that they expected 50% casualties on landing. It was a little salutary word to hear. But I sorted that out, what kind of a soldier I was going to be, how I was going to conduct myself and so on. And so I was quite prepared to be, to live out the traditions of the parachute regiment. And as we took off from this country on the evening of D-Day, we could see ahead. We were flying over the sea. We had to hook up before we got to the coast, of course. And we could see this magnificent fireworks display, but we knew full well that it was the defences of the enemy, which were very shrewdly done. And we suddenly found that we could hardly stand because we were being rocked by being caught up in this amount of fire. And then with a command to jump, we still could hardly stand, but we were helped out of the aircraft by a very efficient and strong man who gave a helping hand as it was needed. And then I just landed. I landed in water, which meant that it was a softish landing. The enemy, they had dug deep trenches and they had flooded it from a nearby river. And quite a lot of men died that way. And I was 14 hours before I got out of that water. And the memories are very sharp. I'd met up with another chap from my brigade, and we came out about 4 o'clock in the afternoon to a little knoll of trees that was overlooking a road, that was overlooking a farmhouse. And we had some food, we dried out a little, we kept the farmhouse under observation, and lest it was occupied by the Germans, we felt that we ought to go and at least find out. And so the two of us, we paraded across the field, and Paddy, my friend, an Irishman, of course, he knocked the door while I covered him with my gun. And we were welcomed in the warmest possible way by the French farmer and his wife and small daughter. And we discovered that there were other paras in the same situation, but more importantly, the priest was there. And the priest was very anxious about the liberation of his country. He also spoke perfect English. And he said, I know another group of your men, the other side of the village. I will contact them, and they will be with you to give you your orders. And so we landed at 10 minutes to 1 on the morning of D-Day, and it was 3 days later before I got to the place where I should have been with my signals headquarters, only to discover that the casualty rate was even greater than we'd anticipated. But they were important days, very much written in my mind and heart.
Harry, some of the viewers today will remember that on the 75th anniversary of D-Day last year, you went back to Normandy to parachute out of a Dakota. How did it feel to do it all again?
It was brilliant. It really was. I'd done a practice jump the year before because I'd never jumped from higher than 850 feet. And I didn't quite know how I would cope with a free fall. So I laid on a practice jump, which was, two of my granddaughters said, we'll do it with you. A great-grandson said, I'll do it with you. So the four of us did a jump from the same aircraft and from 10,000 feet. And it was absolutely fabulous. So that when we came up to the real, to the anniversary jump last year, which was held on the 5th of January to get the drop out of the way before the more solemn day, the next day, I was looking forward to it very, very keenly, and it was thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyable.
Well, Harry, I know it's your 96th birthday in a few days, the 17th of May, so from all of us, we'd love to wish you a very, very happy birthday. We've had also a message from Zico on Facebook. Thank you, Harry. My granddad jumped into Normandy with the 6th Airborne, so I wonder if you know each other, and the 3rd Troop Royal Engineers. But thank you so much for sharing your story today, and a happy birthday.
Thank you very much indeed.
Now, lockdown has forced us all to rethink our shopping and cooking habits as we make our grocery shop stretch that little bit further. Here to help us make the most of the food left in our cupboards and fridges is TV chef Melissa Hemsely. Hi there. Afternoon, Melissa. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, good afternoon, Sonali. Hello, everybody.
We are used to feeding ourselves and our families, but this has really focused us on expiration dates and meal planning, hasn't it?
Very much so. I mean, with my channels and my readers and people asking questions, lots of people have been saying, how can I make the most out of what I've got? How can I stretch my food further? How can I avoid wasting? And how can I really cherish what I've got? So that comes back time and time again about really wanting to look after our loved ones and ourselves through food and not waste.
Tell us more about what you're going to be making today.
Well, I'm going to be making, inspired by today and my family, that my father was in the forces and my grandmother in the Land Army, I'm making waste not, want not, veg fritters. So thinking about the Dig for Victory gardens, and I know lots of people have turned to planting and growing in their spaces, parsnips, turnips, carrots, potatoes. I've got some really lovely fritters that I'd like to show you. This is what they look like here. The waste not, want not fritters, any veg goes, and it's very, very simple. You just grate up your vegetables so that they look like this. Can you see that? You grate them up, pinch of salt, any spices or herbs that you might be growing in your windowsill, salt and pepper, an egg, and then you just start frying them. Let me show you. So that's what they look like there. And I think, you know, back then there would have been used dripping and any kind of animal fat you could use. You could use oil or butter now, and then you just give them a lovely little flip, like so. And they make the most delicious, delicious snacks. And really, when I say anything goes, anything goes. Any veg at all. I like them for brunch with an egg on top or as a snack, and they're really beautiful, hot, warm, cold too. And their leftovers are excellent the next day. You gave them a go, I think, as well. And then I've got this dip here, a very, very simple dip. I mean, lots of people back then and now are preserving. We're making chutneys and jams. We're making food last longer. This is actually frozen peas coming into spring. This is a frozen pea dip. I'm looking forward to some fresh peas coming in. So those fritters on here, and then a little bit of pea on top. Delicious, like that. And this is really important to me, and I think to everybody, to very much cherish and really give thanks to our supply chain, the farmers, the growers, the people that get food to us. And also, I know lots of people have said that making 3 meals a day for their families now, and everybody, how much they really, really appreciate the love that goes into all the people that look after us through food. And for me, food is the #1 way to show appreciation and connect. I know lots of people have been doing chats like we've been doing today on tech and having dinners with their loved ones and their grandparents and their grandchildren. And I think that's so lovely over this bank holiday weekend that we can connect together this way through food. Maybe watch each other eat, maybe watch each other cook, and share recipe ideas too.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I didn't quite catch you, Melissa. Go on, say that again.
I was just going to say, if anyone's up for making these waste not, want not fritters, the recipe is going to be up on the website. So I hope you'll give it a go.
Yeah, it's up on the website, and I used that recipe from the website to make them last night. So here's some I made earlier. I've always wanted to say that. I'm going to take the dip out. So I made mine with a chili yogurt dip, quite a sour yogurt, because I use parsnips and carrots, which are quite sweet. So I needed something sour to sort of counteract that. And I had to make a couple of substitutions because no one can find anything they want at the moment. Gram flour, can't find it for love nor money. So I had some corn flour in the pantry. So I used corn flour instead, and I can confirm it totally works. And also, I don't eat egg because I'm vegan, so I substituted that with some chickpea water, which sounds weird, but it's the thing that comes out of the can. They call it aquafaba. We'd made loads of chana masala a couple of days before, so we've got loads and loads of the chickpea water. Don't throw that away. It's amazing. It's a great egg substitute, and I made vegan chocolate mousse the other day, and yeah, that's really... So in this time of waste not, want not, that's my little tip. So they taste great.
Thank you for those tips too. I love it. It will be different every single time, and that is the beauty of cooking. Different every time. Work with what you've got.
Melissa, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Now, at the beginning of the Second World War, the Royal Navy was the largest naval fleet in the world, but defending our shores from invasion while battling the enemy in the maritime war that followed cost the lives of many thousands. Here to explain what life was like for the men aboard the naval fleet is Bill Taylor. Hello, Bill. How are you?
Hello there. Very well, thank you.
We hear so often about the young men, just boys really, who joined up, and you were one of those, Bill. Only 17 when you ran away to join the Royal Navy. What made you do that?
Well, I was living away from home, actually. And then one day I was out and I saw the recruiting office, and I thought, well, that's a good idea. I went in there and volunteered for the Royal Navy. I was just 17 at the time. I was accepted and did all the necessary forms, etc. Had a medical, and eventually I joined the Royal Navy and trained at HMS Collingwood at 17 and finished there as a boy seaman. And joined HMS Emerald, a cruiser.
And you ended up travelling to Russia with the Arctic convoys. Tell us about that.
Well, the Arctic convoys, I went on those after being out with the Eastern Fleet. What happened was we were doing after I did my training, I went up to Scotland to Scapa Flow, and got involved with the Atlantic convoys, defending them. And there was a large troop convoy being built up, and it had to go to Gibraltar in the Mediterranean. And we were involved in that, escorting the troop ships across. From there, we went, once we got to Gibraltar, we carried on down the Med to Suez Canal, through there to the Indian Ocean, where we joined the Eastern Fleet. The cruiser was a 6-inch gun cruiser. My action station was on a 6-inch gun, and from there we spent a lot of time at sea all around the Indian Ocean. One day we came across a couple of life rafts. They had been adrift for some time, and on one was 6 Indian crew, and there was 3 Merchant Navy officers on the other one, and their craft had been got waterlogged and was just about afloat. So we lowered a boat, picked them up, and took them aboard, and eventually dropped them at one of the bases in the Indian Ocean. That was in 1942 and 43. We served out there. We came back in 1943, at the end of 43, and we went straight away, came back through the Med, got to Scotland, and went into dry dock, where we had our own aircraft. They took all that away and put it in the catapult, etc. Took all that away. We went on leave, and they removed all the launching gear and everything. When we came back, they'd replaced it with an anti-aircraft gun. We then joined the Home Fleet and eventually went down south, where the convoys for the D-Day landings were forming. On the 5th of June, we were ready to go, but the weather was too rough for the landing craft, and that was postponed until the 6th of June. We left early in the morning. We followed the minesweeps across the channel. Once we got there, we went along the coast to the British section towards I can't think of the name of the place now.
Don't worry at all, Bill. I mean, your story is incredible, especially on VE Day itself. Tell our viewers where you were when you heard the news that the war was over.
On VE Day, we came back on a return convoy from the Mansk. We got to Greenock in Scotland, and as we entered harbour, they just announced that the war had ended. From there onwards, well, it was unbelievable. Everyone was cheering. The merchant vessels in the harbour were blowing on the sirens. Some had effigies of Hitler dressed in his suit and etc., hanging from the derricks, etc. And the crowds were cheering and waving it, you know, that sort of thing. It was fantastic welcome. We eventually, after tidying the corvette up, we went ashore. Yeah, we really, the welcome we received was unbelievable, with the amount of the cheering and the crowds waiting to greet us on the shore. It was unbelievable. And we eventually went ashore in Greenock, and then we went up to Glasgow. But drinks well, we were never short of a drink. I don't know where it came from at times, but it was a great welcome. And I'll always remember the feeling we had that it was all over and we were free at last. And, you know, it's all now a memory and something we will never forget, especially the Russian Arctic convoys. We still get invited on certain anniversaries to attend St. Petersburg. They have ceremonies there. They've got an Arctic convoy memorial there where we lay a wreath, etc. But also other places, Crimea, we've been there. And all the ceremonies, we were most welcome because the Russian people have never forgotten the sacrifices that were made on the Russian Arctic convoys, which enabled the Russians to build up their army, attack the German forces that were at the gates of Leningrad. And when D-Day came, it forced Hitler to fight on 2 fronts, the Russian front and the D-Day front. And he had to split his armies in 2, which made a very big difference, I think, to the D-Day landings.
Certainly
always
did, and you
remember
certainly
that.
played your part, especially on those Arctic convoys. I'd say you deserve a wee tipple today, Bill. And your medals, I mean, they have caused a stir. Lots of comments about your medals. And Cheryl has said, what a fantastic man you are, Bill. Thank you so much for your bravery. Enjoy the rest of your day.
On this side of the ones, and these are the air ones, you know.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. It's been great to see them. Thank you so much to Bill. Now, the Chief Commandant of Women in the Royal Navy is Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal, of course. Earlier this week, as part of the Check-in and Chat initiative, Her Royal Highness spoke to Dorothy Pettican Runnicle. Dorothy worked as a petty officer, air radio mechanic with the Wrens in the war. During their chat, they found out that they had something in common.
Deborah, where are you?
I'm in Gloucester.
Are you in Gloucester?
Your Royal Highness, welcome to my home.
Thank you very much. I'm not so far away.
Right. You're also in Gloucestershire.
I am indeed. I'm sort of 500 feet up, though.
Wow.
But you served right the way through the war, is that right? Did you
No,
sign
no.
up?
I was an evacuee from East London that escaped from the bombing.
Oh, that's right.
I was born in 1925 and I was an East Londoner, and we'd already received a lot of German children into our grammar school and other schools in East London. And I was evacuated with this school. And when I got my matriculation, I returned to my home in East London and immediately volunteered for the services because it was the thing to do. We got to get this war finished, hadn't we?
Wow. How old were you then?
I was 17 and a half when I came back to London and volunteered, but because I'd had the privilege of physics and maths in my matriculation studies and done well at it, there weren't many people doing that. They said, no, you can't be a cook. You've got to wait for a college course and you've got to learn about radio communication into our aeroplanes.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have it, you know, in the First World.
A lot of your service was with the Fleet Air Arm, is that right?
With Fleet Air Arm, yes.
I learned.
Yes, I just ran the home county in Britain. I didn't go on an aircraft carrier. My brother did. He went ahead of me. I was following in his footsteps, and we were not allowed to leave on aircraft carriers during that period of the war. Towards the end of the war, I was actually practicing from 1943 to 46. But it challenged me, it stretched me. I learned about death.
Yes. And have you found yourself very restricted recently?
Very, yes. But I'm in one of those special statuses called exceptionally vulnerable. So I'm not allowed out of my flat but I'm so lucky to have a warm flat. And I'm lucky to have some IT skills, which I didn't learn until later in my life, till I was 70 something, and they're not very good. I hang on.
I live in hope that I'm going to get better.
Well, I was your age when I started to learn.
Well, I feel there is that. There's a lot more to be learned. Never stops though, does it?
No, I think that's the good thing. You keep on learning, it keeps you going. But never, and I think that I've been able to keep a ability to change my mind on things. I think that's another.
That's a skill of its own. But you're involved with the Wrens Association, aren't you?
Yes, they nominated me because of my war service, and I became a member of that association when I got here, because my daughter said you need to work with outside organisations. You mustn't just stay in the same 200 people. You need to move out and get to know the area. You know, I'm not good in my mobility, and I'm worried about that with not getting out of the flat, but I got instruction from my grandchildren. I got to stamp about the flat from each room and pretend I'm doing physical work.
Very good. And there's some actually quite good sort of sitting down exercises, but I won't bother you with those. Anyway,
yes,
thank you so much, Emma. It's a real pleasure to speak to you. And I hope your memories on VE Day are mostly good.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, I was hoping for the exercises. Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal and Dorothy Pettican Runnicle. Now, our next guest has been on an emotional journey to retrace his grandmother's wartime steps as he learnt about the work she did to keep Britain fed. Please welcome Radzi Chinyanganya. Hi, Radzi. How are you?
Hey, Sonali. Very well, thank you. It's a joy to be here, actually.
Good to see you again. Tell us about Grandmother Annie.
Yeah, my Annie McGarity, she was a humble woman, probably the most humble woman I think I've ever met. I think what pretty much sums her up is we found out at her funeral that she famously walked in her 80s 2 miles to save 5 pence on carrots. And that kind of comes from an indomitable spirit. She came from the very, very north of Scotland, close to Thurso, a place called Holkirk. And I visited there as a part of a BBC show, Homefront Heroes, a couple of years ago, and it was the first time I'd actually been there, and I'd seen photos of the place. I'd never actually seen the place, but to know that there were 8-foot snowdrifts many moons ago there, when she had the most brutal winters, when her and her sister Margaret brought up my Uncle George when she was 16 and her mother passed away. She was just an incredible woman and had so little, such archaic tools to run a farm, and that's her there. That's her in the late 50s, and she was so incredibly strong mentally, physically. But she wouldn't believe this is happening, that I'm talking to you now on Facebook Live, talking about her on VE Day. You know, that's something almost she would actually not even like the concept of it, because she was truly, truly humble and a very special woman. And actually, just like many other women in that era who quietly, behind the cameras, behind any exposure, just got on with things and helped ultimately feed the nation and keep the country going.
That story about walking 2 miles to save 5p is such a familiar one. I've got so many of them. My parents used to not take the bus at university because to save 3p, and you know, that generation and the generations even below them have those kinds of stories. I saw that you'd been back to the farm where she'd worked.
Yeah, you used the word emotional before, and that's exactly what it was, because I'd never actually been there myself, but I got to. So Rob Unsworth, the exec at the BBC at the time, decided he wanted to put on this series called Homefront Heroes, and it was about celebrating ordinary people with stories that you otherwise wouldn't know of. And the fact that she was a woman, the fact that she was so unbelievably humble. I mean, when I did my first ever day on Blue Peter, I did a make. And I mentioned my granny, because I said during the make, as my granny used to say, you can add more sugar in, you can't take it out. And my Uncle Tommy, her son, then texted me and just said, your granddad would not believe that you've just mentioned his wife on television. And she was just such a special woman. And actually, the house that she was born in is still there. It's almost a place that's been unchanged in the best part of 200 years. And to know that that's so instrumental in our family's history was a real privilege. And getting to meet Billy, her nephew, who now runs the farm, getting to go on the tractor. In a time, obviously, back then, there was no mechanisation. So to go back there was a really special time. It was a place I felt strangely familiar, even though I hadn't been there. It was truly wonderful. I'm grateful to Rob for thinking of me and putting me forward and putting my granny forward for that series and being able to talk about my family's history.
And you mentioned your grandfather there. That's how they met, that he was stationed nearby, near the farm. But your grandmother had a terrible time. He was reported missing, believed killed. But the story does have a happy ending.
Well, again, this pretty much sums up my granny. Never mentioned this to any of our family, certainly not my mum or me. And at her funeral, the priest told the story of when because he lost his leg during the Second World War in Italy, he was then reported as dead. And so she and his family got the report that, and that's my grandad there with my mum, who's probably about 5, maybe 4 years old then, Anthony McGarity. And he was a really, really special bloke, just salt of the earth, hilarious man, always cracks a joke, which actually I think pretty much sums up the story, because it really was almost a film script of a story. So the scenario was that he was reported dead. All of his family and my granny believed him to be dead. Roll on 6 weeks, they get a knock at the door, and there he is in Dundee. He's alive and well. And then the thing that I find most crazy about that is, I'd tell anyone that's willing to listen about that story, but both him and Anne did not tell anyone. And that pretty much just sums up that spirit, that it was a time that they had to go through, such a challenging and difficult time that they don't hold anyone in particular accountable for. I mentioned my granddad lost his leg. He had really, really basic prosthesis for the rest of his life. Didn't hold a grudge, just got on with life. And so that story pretty much sums them both up as special people, didn't want to fuss, and just got on with life.
You probably got the storytelling skills from the other side of the family, which we're very grateful for, because it means that today we got to hear about Granny Annie. Thank you, Radzi.
Well, thank you, Sonali. Have a great day.
And you. Time for another performance from Alfie Boe. This time he's joined by singer-songwriter Twinnie, another huge supporter of the veterans, who recently gave a special performance of Somewhere Over the Rainbow for the Nightingale Hospital in London. Such a beautiful song, and they've chosen to sing it again as a duet for us.
Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me. Somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly, birds fly over the rainbow. Why, oh, why can't I?
Right back at you, Twinnie and Alfie Boe. Thank you so much. That's all we have time for on this special broadcast to mark VE Day 75. Thank you to all my guests who joined us. But this is not the end of today's commemorations. There are two special events still to come, and you can see them on BBC One. The first, at 2:45 this afternoon, will pay tribute to the iconic speech that Winston Churchill made on VE Day itself. And this evening at 8 o'clock, there'll be VE Day 75, a musical celebration. So don't forget to throw open your windows at 9 o'clock tonight. Join in the nation's We'll Meet Again sing-along. You can download the lyrics on our website, so there really is no excuse not to take part. Thank you so much for watching. 75 years ago today, there were crowds spontaneously celebrating out on the streets. The times do not allow that now, but we've still managed to come together to remember and commemorate. Thank you for joining us. I'll leave the final word to General Bashall, National President of the Royal British Legion. It's goodbye from me. Have a lovely day.
A message to the VE Day generation. 75 years ago, Sir Winston Churchill spoke to you from the balcony of the Ministry of Health. "My dear friends, this is your hour," he said. "This is not victory of a party or any class. It's a victory of the great British nation as a whole. You came together as one nation, whether through our armed forces on land, air and sea, or through the contributions all of you at home who gave to the war effort. Your struggle was a mighty one, but your victory was mightier still. You won for us a great peace. We thank you for defending our nation and our way of life. We are grateful for your legacy of preserving for us our values and our precious freedoms. Today, we are once again being tested as a nation. As we face this struggle, we will not fail you. We will neither forget your sacrifice nor your courage and determination. Inspired by your example, we will meet the difficulties ahead. From your hands, we now take up the torch. We will not be found wanting. We will honour the priceless gifts you gave to us and pass on our nation even greater and stronger than before. Thank you.